In the northern lands, the wind howled through the mountains as if foretelling the coming of a great storm. The tribes of the north, once united by peace, had begun to fracture. The strong and proud warriors, sons of the storm, heard whispers of an approaching invasion from the south. Their leaders, fierce but proud, began to prepare for war. Elders spoke of a prophecy: the storm will rise and only the bravest will survive. But no one could agree on how to fight the coming battle. Among the leaders was Aker, a young warrior with a sharp mind. Though he lacked the experience of the elders, his heart burned with a desire to protect his people. Aker warned against blind aggression, urging the tribes to unite and strategize rather than rush to battle. However, the older chiefs scoffed at his words, believing only in the power of force. The storm had already begun, and soon it would break upon them. As the storm clouds gathered, a shadow fell over the northern tribes. One of the northern leaders, Jorik, had secretly allied with the southern invaders, believing they would bring greater power to the north. In exchange for wealth and land, Jorik betrayed his brothers, sending secret messages to the invaders revealing their defenses. The storm that threatened the north now had a traitor in its midst, and Aker found himself fighting against both the approaching army and the betrayal within. When Aker discovered Jorik's treachery, he knew that exposing the betrayal would cost him dearly. He wrestled with his conscience. Should he reveal the truth to the tribes and risk weakening their defenses, or should he wait until the invasion began? In the end, he chose to act swiftly. He went to the leaders of the other tribes, revealing the betrayal and warning them of the impending attack. But the damage had already been done, and the trust between the tribes was shattered. The southern army, led by General Varus, advanced swiftly into the northern lands, burning villages and taking prisoners. The northern tribes, now divided and distrustful of one another, met the invaders on the battlefield. The warriors of the north fought bravely, but their strength was scattered. Aker, at the forefront of the battle, led a group of young warriors against Varus's forces. The clash of steel rang out as the two armies collided in a storm of chaos and blood. Despite the fierce resistance, the northern warriors were outnumbered and disorganized. Aker fought with all his might, but he couldn't help but feel the weight of the betrayal on his shoulders. The once united tribes were now torn apart by mistrust, and the war that was meant to protect them seemed to be pulling them further into ruin. But amid the chaos, Aker caught a glimpse of Jorik, who had aligned himself with the southern invaders, fighting alongside Varus's troops. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound on the battlefield. In the midst of the battle, Aker managed to rally a small group of warriors to break through the southern lines. They fought with the fury of the storm itself, striking fear into the hearts of the invaders. Aker's leadership shone through, and the tide of the battle seemed to shift. For a brief moment, it seemed that the northern tribes might have a chance to reclaim their lands. The warriors fought with newfound hope, their spirits lifted by Aker's unwavering resolve. But as the battle raged on, Aker realized that victory would not come through strength alone. The divisions between the northern tribes were too deep, and trust could not be rebuilt in a single fight. He knew that the true storm was not the one on the battlefield, but the one within their hearts, a storm of doubt, betrayal, and broken bonds. Only by uniting the tribes would they have any hope of defeating the invaders. Aker retreated from the battlefield, his mind set on a new goal: unity. He knew that to defeat the southern invaders, the northern tribes would need to put aside their differences and fight as one. He traveled to each tribe, seeking out the leaders and speaking with them about the need for peace. Many of the leaders resisted, still clinging to old rivalries and mistrust. But Aker's words began to find their mark, and slowly a fragile alliance began to form. In the quiet moments between the battles, Aker met with the people of the north, listening to their fears and hopes. The more he heard, the more he understood the deep pain caused by years of conflict. He realized that the war was not just about defending their lands, it was about healing the wounds of their people. But unity would not come easily. The tribes had been at war with one another for generations, and the scars ran deep. With great effort, Aker called for a council of all the northern leaders to meet in a neutral ground. It was a dangerous move, for the leaders were suspicious of one another, and the risk of further betrayal loomed large. But Aker insisted that they could not afford to continue fighting among themselves. As the leaders gathered, the air was thick with tension. Some refused to speak, others argued fiercely. But Aker remained calm, urging them to see the bigger picture. The council was a long and heated affair, but Aker's words began to resonate. Slowly, the leaders of the northern tribes began to set aside their personal grievances, understanding that their survival depended on cooperation. The betrayal of Jorik was a painful reminder of their fractured state, but it also served as a wake-up call. If they did not come together, they would be wiped out by the southern invaders. Aker's vision of unity began to take shape, and a fragile agreement was forged. With the tribes now united, Aker and his allies prepared for the final confrontation with the southern invaders. The storm had reached its peak and the northern warriors stood together, their hearts united in a common cause. The battle was inevitable. As the southern army advanced once more, Aker led his people into the storm, ready to fight for their survival. This time they would not face the enemy divided. This time they would stand as one. The final battle was fierce, but the unity of the northern tribes proved stronger than the southern forces had anticipated. Aker fought with the might of his ancestors, and the warriors of the north followed his lead. The southern invaders, unprepared for such fierce resistance, faltered. The storm that had once threatened to destroy the north was now the force that drove the invaders back. The northern warriors had found their strength not in their swords but in their unity. In the aftermath of the battle, the northern tribes stood victorious. The southern invaders were pushed back, their forces scattered. But the victory came at a heavy price. Many lives were lost, and the scars of the war would take years to heal. Aker stood at the heart of the battlefield, surveying the destruction. Though the northern tribes had won, he knew that the war had left deep wounds that would not easily be healed. As the tribes began to rebuild, Aker knew that their survival depended not just on their strength in battle, but on their ability to heal the rifts that had torn them apart. The storm had passed, but its effects would linger. Aker resolved to work toward a lasting peace, to ensure that the storm of war would never return to the north. The path ahead would be long, but he was determined to lead his people toward a future of unity and prosperity. As the north began to rebuild, the memories of the fallen warriors haunted the survivors. Among them was Aker's closest friend Torik, who had been slain in the final battle. Torik had been with Aker through the darkest times, and his death weighed heavily on Aker's heart. To honor his memory, Aker traveled to Torik's village, carrying his friend's ashes back to his homeland. There he built a monument in Torik's honor, a reminder of the sacrifices made for the future. Aker's journey was not just one of physical distance, but of emotional healing. As he stood before the monument, he realized that the storm of war had left more than just physical scars. The emotional toll on the warriors of the north would take time to heal. But Aker believed that by honoring the fallen and acknowledging the pain, the people of the north could begin to rebuild not just their homes but their hearts. Years passed, and the northern tribes slowly returned to a state of peace. The leaders, once rivals, now worked together to ensure the prosperity of their people. Aker had risen to become the chief of his tribe, and his leadership was respected across the north. Though the storm of war had passed, the people never forgot the lessons they had learned. The bonds forged in battle had created a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. During a great feast, Aker stood before his people and gave a speech. He spoke of the trials they had faced, the sacrifices made, and the strength they had found in unity. The storm that had once threatened to destroy them had instead forged them into a stronger, more resilient people. Aker's vision had come to life, and the north was now a land of peace and prosperity. It was a hard-earned peace, but one that would endure. As the years continued to pass, Aker's legacy lived on. The story of the storm that shook the north was passed down through generations, a tale of war, betrayal, and unity. It was a story that reminded the people of the north of the importance of cooperation and trust. Aker's name was spoken with reverence not just as a warrior, but as a leader who had guided his people through the darkest times. Aker, now an elder, spent his final years teaching the young warriors about the importance of unity. He shared his experiences, the lessons learned through the storm, and the value of leadership that came from the heart. As the north continued to thrive, the people remembered the storms of the past, always mindful of the fragile peace they had fought so hard to preserve. Just as the people of the north began to believe that the peace would last forever, a new threat emerged. A group of southern raiders, seeking revenge for their lost conquest, began to raid the northern villages once more. Though not as powerful as the southern army, these raiders were ruthless and cunning. The people of the north, though united, knew that they could not let their guard down. The storm was not over yet. Aker's heart heavy with the knowledge that peace was always fragile, he called upon the leaders of the northern tribes once more. They prepared for another conflict, but this time they would be ready. Aker knew that the real enemy was not just the raiders but the complacency that peace could bring. The storm had returned, but the northern tribes had learned from their past. This time they would face it together. The northern tribes, now battle-hardened and united, faced the southern raiders in a final stand. Aker led his people into battle, once again fighting not just for their land but for their unity. The storm was raging once more, but the warriors of the north fought with the strength of those who had endured much. Their swords clashed with the raiders, and the sound of battle filled the air. This time the north would not be defeated. The fight was long and brutal, but the northern tribes' unity proved stronger than the raiders' fury. With Aker at the forefront, the invaders were pushed back, their plans thwarted. The storm that had once threatened to destroy the north had been conquered by the strength of its people. As the raiders fled, the northern warriors stood victorious, knowing that their greatest weapon was not their swords but their unity. After the final battle, Aker looked out across the northern lands, his heart at peace. He knew that the storm had shaped him and his people in ways they could never forget. The land was scarred, but it had healed just as the hearts of the warriors had healed. Aker's wisdom had guided his people through the storm, and now they stood united, stronger than ever. The people of the north had learned that peace was not just the absence of war, but the strength to face the storms that would inevitably come. As Aker passed on his leadership to the next generation, he reminded them of the lessons learned. The storm would always return in one form or another. But as long as they stood together, there was no storm they could not weather. The story of the Sons of the Storm was told for generations to come, a reminder of the power of unity in the face of adversity. The people of the north, once torn apart by war and betrayal, now lived in harmony. Their villages flourished and their hearts were strong. Though the storms of life would always come, they knew that as long as they stood together, nothing could break them. Moral of the story: true strength lies in unity. In times of trial and hardship, it is not the individual, but the collective power of a united people that can overcome the greatest challenges.